Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning, and welcome to this morning's edition of Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Martha Rogers, and I'll be your host this morning. And I'm so glad that you joined us, and I hope that what we discuss this morning will be a worthwhile adventure for your life's journey. Woody Allen once said, "I am not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens." And then on a more serious note, Norman Cousins said, "Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside of us when we live." Life, death, dying. It's not something we talk about a whole lot in some circles, but today we're going to spend the next half hour discussing issues pertaining to that subject, the end of life. Dying, death, passing, the end of life, demise, aging, all these words are in the same category, but we rarely use them to talk about ourselves. If you're like me, you'd probably rather avoid the subject altogether. But dying and death are a fact of life, and as the Buddhist saying goes, life is uncertain, death is certain. And to help us explore the topic this morning, I'd like to introduce to you our distinguished panelist. Sitting next to me is Dr. Ghosh. Dr. Ghosh is with the Center for Oncology and Hematology. Welcome. And next to Dr. Ghosh is Dr. Sommerfeld, who is the Hospice of Mercy. Well, let me read this right. Hospice of Mercy Medical Director. Welcome. And rounding out our panel is Rabbi Todd Faubum of Temple, Judah. Thank you for all being here.
Thank you.
I went to the beach this summer in my old hometown in New England. And when I was there as a child, the beach was crowded. We all swam. It was full of life. And next to the beach was a shipbuilding business. And next to that was the sewer plant. And we didn't know about the standards we have now. And when I went back this summer, the beach was empty. This beautiful beach on the Atlantic Ocean was empty. And I asked some friends why, and they said, "Oh, can't let our kids there. They might get sick or they might die." I was shocked. Die from swimming in the town beach, which is cleaner now than probably when I was there. And that got me really thinking about death. What are we saying about death in our society? And are we embracing death as natural? Are we avoiding death? I'm just going to throw that right out to you this morning.
No, I think you are talking about two things. One is the fear of death, and fear of death is there and probably will be there because it's unknown. The other is acceptance of death. I think doing the right thing, living every moment is the right thing to do. But I have seen people who are fearful of death, but they live the life. So it's a two separate issues the way I look at it. And I think in my experience, the people in the Western world take the death much better than people in the Eastern world. Even though I know you quoted the quotation from Buddha, and Buddha also said that life is God and life is at this moment. So this is the moment, this is God. So.
Well, Rabbi, that's something that sounds like for you to jump right in.
Well, I think that we do avoid discussion of death in a lot of places in our lives because it's the only unknown for sure. We can't know what it's going to be until we get there, if there is even really anything. And I think that's a great fear for a lot of people, and so they're not willing to really discuss it. Even there's an idea that if you're talking about death, then you're being morbid in some way, as opposed to being realistic about what life is. I mean, if you want to get the most out of your life, then you also have to understand that it's going to end at some point, and you should be rational and realistic about that. And Judaism would clearly say that.
And I think Christianity would say that too. And
You know, it is when you are growing, you are maturing, it is hard to thrive something and get something knowing that I'm going to die. So where do you find the balance? And that balance comes with more in-depth learning about what life is, and the spirituality comes into play. And it's a process that we evolve and we get there. So if a college student thinks that I'm going to die tomorrow, he may not work hard to create something productive.
Judaism would say that you should live each day of your life as if it were your last. That means atone appropriately for any mistakes on this day, live your life to the fullest, be with your friends and your family, do anything and everything you can as if tomorrow was your last, today was your last day. And I think having an understanding or a belief, not a belief, knowing that there is an end, that death is coming, that's the only end, should give more meaning to your life instead of less. Make each day even that much more special because you know that there's only a limited number of them to you. You don't have immortality.
I have to agree with that. Dr. Summerfield?
I think it's one thing to know intellectually that a person's going to die. I think it's another thing to accept it. And it is hard to live each day if you know that your time on earth is finite. What I find in the work I do through hospice and palliative care is that people these days just aren't exposed to death and dying. 100 years ago, people died at home, surrounded by their families, usually after a brief illness or a sudden accident. And now people die often after lengthy illnesses. They might die in a nursing home, oftentimes alone, in a hospital or an intensive care unit, and families aren't necessarily around them, seeing them go through the process.
I read a book once, I think it was called Everyman. It was the Philip Roth's Everyman, and he was talking about death has become a process, not a presence. We used to talk about the presence of death or death visited, and now that we're camouflaging it more to make it more clinical, or it becomes, how did he say it? That we used to talk about the greatness of one's life as like a biography, but now we end up ending life with our medical histories instead of our biographies. And that struck me.
You know, we have, and you are right, I think the modern medicine and also the change of the society, the structure of the society, the family unit has changed. Now, I think medicine-wise, we know that at the end of the life, the dying process where patients do not eat, and so on and so forth, and every time they move, that doesn't mean that they're in pain. But I think it has to do with the way the society is changing.
And if you're not around people who have been through the process, it's very scary. And I think when we medicalize the process, it becomes even more scary. You know,
The process of death?
Of dying.
Of dying.
Of dying, because, you know, someone might have a lot of medical procedures, and what I find is that doctors are often reluctant to talk about dying or acknowledge that time is short, and patients are reluctant to ask about it. And so I oftentimes will find that when I bring up the subject of how much time might be remaining, patients and families want to talk about these things. They want to know, but they also don't want to worry that they'll upset their family or that they'll upset the patient. And so a lot of times waiting until everybody says that they're okay with talking about it, it's too late, you know.
Yeah. You know, that issue, that what you are saying, is very complex. Unfortunately, you know, the medicine is a big business, and we are all part of the problem, not part of the solutions. And I think the end of the life care, I mean, for example, in this town we had 2 hospices. Now we have 5, 6 hospices. So we are getting more hospice than the patients. So I think we are also using end of the life death as a medical approach. So I think, and you were right, many times we don't tell the patients the futility of the treatment. I think that has a lot to do with the business of medicine. Right. I think we as a society really needs to stand up and ask those questions. The patient needs to ask those questions: what is right, what is wrong.
So in a situation like that, are we prolonging life or prolonging death?
I think it's hard to know, and it depends on the circumstance. I think ideally as a physician, my hope is that I'm prolonging life or making each day as good as it can be, and certainly not shortening life, but that isn't always the case for every patient. And I think that sometimes you get caught up in this mill of doing more tests and more treatments, always hoping that you'll come out the other side to some area of health. And oftentimes that's just not realistic as people get sicker and decline.
Is that when the dying process changes from a medical perspective maybe to the more social and familial and maybe spiritual side? Sometimes I think we separate people's dying as we do fragmenting living anymore. And, you know, we do the medical, we do the spiritual over here, we do the social part of the dying with the family and relationships.
Well, I think certainly I think there's some social and spiritual stuff that you know, clearly, you know, we have clergy, we have theologians, we have philosophers that can help with all that, and you know, I get congregants every once in a while want to talk about those issues, either because it's coming up quickly for them and they know it, or it's just, you know, they're thinking about their life long term and just want to have those conversations in advance. I think the medical community, though, gets into this mindset where you always want to be trying to help. You want to prolong life. You want to always find the next test. You don't want to ever give anybody a reason to kind of give up hope. That's part of life. Hope is a big part of also some people's treatment and how well that they go through it. But that, you know, doctors need to be honest, very honest with their patients about the benefit of this treatment versus what it's going to do to the quality of life versus, so the conversation should start there with, is this really a worthwhile thing? What benefit am I going to get from it? How many more months or years? Is it really worth it? Or should we start the larger conversation about what you really want out of life? You know, what quality of life do you want to get? What's acceptable quality of life here at the end? And at what point have you moved past that line that we just have to say, how do we make things as comfortable and as easy as possible, so that it can be a dignified death?
And giving some control back to the patient.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been a shift just in the last couple of decades, too.
There's a wonderful story in the Talmud about Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who's the editor of it. When he's at the end of his life, his disciples don't want to let it happen, so they gather outside his house and they're praying on his behalf night and day. And their prayers are essentially working. They're keeping his soul here on earth. But his nursemaid is the one who sees what it's really doing to him, that he's in pain constantly, and he's trying to get up and pray with his disciples, and it's pain, and he's got to take things off and put them back on. And finally, she realizes that they're doing a disservice to him, and she goes up to the roof of the house and throws down a clay jar in between the disciples, and it startles them enough that their prayers stop, and his soul's able to ascend to heaven. And that there's a merciful quality to it in the way the story is told, that we shouldn't go to extraordinary means when all it is doing is prolonging a life that's really no longer a quality of life, a worthwhile life to
And that's
be.
where some of those advanced directives can help a patient, can't they, with not going as extraordinary means? And
I think it's really about matching the available treatments to the patient and family goals of care. Because as a medical provider, we're trained that if we can do it, we should do it. And I think that conversation needs to change in how we train medical providers. But I think advanced directives do a good job of clarifying what's the benefit of a treatment, what's the burden of the treatment, does this treatment help you meet those goals, or is it just keeping you from enjoying the time with your family or being where you want to be?
And is there a new advanced directive in Iowa, and I don't even know if it's nationally, can you speak to that? I forgot the acronym for
Sure.
it.
The one in Iowa is called the IPOST, the Iowa
IPOST,
Physician
yep.
Order for Life-Sustaining Treatments. There is a national movement, but every state kind of does it differently. And it's a document that people can fill out with their doctor, or their specially trained nurses and other providers who can help with that. Hospice providers, palliative care providers can help with that. And really, it just goes through the list of what are the available treatment options when someone's seriously ill or has a critical accident or illness. or is approaching death, and what treatments would they want? Would that person want a ventilator if he or she can't breathe on his own? Would you want medications to keep your blood pressure up if you can't maintain your own blood pressure?
So it's more specific than what existed before and replaces what was available before?
And it actually goes with the
iPost.
person. So whereas before you might be asked in the hospital, you know, would you want to be artificially resuscitated? And then you might go to a care center and be asked the same set of questions. This document you fill out once and it goes with you wherever you are, whether that's at home or in a care center or at the hospital. And if you change your mind down the road, you just rip it up and complete a new one and your doctor signs it.
You know, I think the society, not the doctors, not the business of medicine, not the hospitals, is demanding those things. So I think this is a process that is evolving. You know, the DNR really did not come from the doctors, it was from the patients, because when I was doing residency, each hospital has floors after floors where the patient is tied with the ventilator. And the family will come, it has happened to me, to everyone, can you turn off the ventilator? We said, we cannot do that, you need to go to the court. So they had to go to the court and court had to release. So right now, this a living will is a good start, but it's not enough. So really the person needs to talk to the family members, really what they want, and the system has to change. The system has to change. The education of the doctors needs to change. And in any chronic disease, tying up with the palliative, you know, is a specialty now, like cardiologists, oncologists should be hooked up so that that discussion does initiate. And there are problems where, you know, when I am say I'm seeing oncologists, when I'm talking and counseling a patient, you know, should we tell the patient that yes, this treatment is going to allow you to live 6 months, or I should not? You know, so that society needs to address those, not me, because you know, if I tell you that this treatment is going to prolong you 6 months, and you may say no, or you may say yes. The way it is in your hand. And I think that freedom of the patient also needs to be looked at, and also the whole system is fee for service. More we do, more we get paid. More we get paid. You know, I mean, if you look at in the hospital system, who is the doctor they love, who brings more revenue, and that's nothing wrong. If I am the CEO, I mean, that's the thing I want. So this is really a bigger issue, and it really needs to come from the grassroots. It really needs to come from the patients. And we need to educate the patients more and more about this.
Well, and as a pastor, I would like to put my ad in there that when it gets to the point with a family to say you may have 6 months or not, I really hope there's a support system for the family that can help walk them through or pray them through or give them some faith information to share with, because I think that helps the family get back. But I agree the system needs to be addressed, because I'm wondering if the cost of this long-term care to extend life, in which we all would like to extend probably as much as we can, does that get in the way of us funding maybe some studies for disease control or preventative care, or, you know, is the money misplaced? But that's a whole nother show, I think.
And I think the palliative medicine is addressing those questions, and they have a team, and Amanda could speak more. They have a team which supports, and I think taking care of the cancer patient in this town is much easier because of the support they get from you. I mean, it really makes the things much easier. Right. The family is tired, there is a support system. I cannot imagine taking care of cancer patient in big cities because they don't have that support.
I'm going to turn the tables a little. There was a person in one of my congregations who chose no care and decided to take the natural course with cancer, and entered into hospice in his home and eventually died. And one of his friends came to him and said, "Why are you killing yourself?" And I wonder what that view is in hospice or with doctors, is from the professional side, what is a good death, and what do we support as far as choices? Is it suicidal to not take services? Is it, there's all those ethical questions that get confused for families.
I think it's actually a pretty common myth that hospice takes away hope, or not treating an illness with standard medical treatment will shorten your life. Studies have shown that high quality hospice care and palliative care actually either don't shorten life or they can prolong life. And I think that's because as providers, we're starting to recognize that suffering isn't just physical. Suffering isn't just tumor burden or how short a breath you are when you walk. Suffering is about the physical suffering, but it's also the emotional suffering, those relationships that suffer, and the spiritual and existential questions that come up at the end of life. And unless you address all of those domains of suffering, you're never truly going to be comfortable.
Well, and sometimes I think suffering, and that's one of my things with hospice, I'm not for erasing all pain. I think some of the suffering is where you can have the energy to have those kinds of conversations with your family or with yourself, to know if you're living as you have wanted to live. And if we keep people totally comfortable, then they maybe are not having the opportunity to wrestle with some of those end-of-life joys.
I think it depends on the circumstance and on the patient. I think everybody's values are different.
Well, I'm afraid of pain, so
no, their
don't
backgrounds are
remind
different.
me.
I found that most of my patients don't really fear suffering. They fear suffering without purpose or needless suffering.
Thank you.
And I think that's the real tragedy, when we don't serve patients and help meet their needs as they go through this process.
I went through this with my mother-in-law, who, when she got cancer a couple of years, almost 5 years ago now at this point, that they told us there was nothing really they could do for her originally, and we brought her out for another opinion out to where we were living, and she stayed with us and did treatment, but we also did holistic stuff, and we tried everything we could, just because we knew it was the end of her life. We didn't lose hope that we couldn't do more for her, and really she got another full year of at least 10 months of really good quality life, and we got to spend real time with her that we hadn't. There was a lot of love and hope and wonderful stuff at the end, and we talked about all of these things through the process.
How fortunate.
What do you want? How are you feeling? Are you still feeling strong? Do you want to keep doing this? And when she was ready to be done with it, she was ready to be done with it, and she moved home and went back, and hospice took over. And hospice was a 3-month process, and she was comfortable throughout it.
She was ready.
And everybody got to come out and spend time and say goodbye in an appropriate way, and it was beautiful end of life. And we would have loved 20 more years with her. But
So I think, go ahead.
We would have loved more time with her, of course, but I'm not going to deny what we got a wonderful year, a really wonderful year with her.
I wish it could be that story for everyone.
Yeah.
Dr.
I
Ghosh?
think that there is 3 things that 3 of you have said, and I want to kind of make some points on that. One is that's the drawbacks of our care, that we believe that doing something, meaning running tests or doing cardiac cath or doing a dialysis or giving chemotherapy. So I think that's if I believe that physicians should be a healer, try to heal the patient's suffering. So we need to understand the patient's suffering. We cannot impose ourselves. So when somebody says we cannot do it, that's totally wrong. We cannot do anything. That is a totally wrong, inappropriate statement to make.
We were not happy with it.
Because now with the palliative care and hospice, which addresses the patient as a whole. So you have care. So telling someone, when I talk to a patient, I never say that I'm going to stop the treatment and other. I said, things are changing. We need to have a different way to take care of your care. Here's the things we'll do. You move on.
Well, and healing and curing are not the same, and healing towards death is just such a gift to be able to give a patient.
But you can't cure death, right?
One of the statements that you made is that this patient was completely comfortable, and somebody comes and says that why you are killing yourself. Now, I see day in and day out, there is a pressure from, so far we have talked what the traditional medicine does. We forget what the so-called alternative medicine does. And many times I have seen when somebody comes and makes those statements, they are selling a product. They're giving a hope for something that the patient do not want, and if they have resources, that is also wrong. We need to support the patient.
False
whatever
hope
they
isn't
are.
hope.
False hope, right.
Right.
And that's a spiritual issue for me.
Right.
So,
It's a
And-
medical issue for me.
yeah.
and you know, in what Amanda said is that when the patient was asked, and there was studies published on this, that why you are afraid of death, and actually the afraid of the death is that meaningless life, and maybe everybody will forget. So they die more peacefully when they are surrounded by the people, family, and the hospice nurse. You know, many times they are with the patient.
It's
when
an
they die.
active thing.
That is a great care.
Yes.
But I can't define a good death for everyone. I think only the person can define
Absolutely.
what their good death is. And I think for every person, that's going to look like something a little
And
different.
sometimes it comes from the good life.
And everybody has the quality. That was the point that I was making. Everybody has a different standard on what the quality of life is that's acceptable for them, and that's a conversation that we have to have. And when your quality of life isn't the quality that you want it to be, that you can't do the things, then I think we have to have the conversation about, so how do we then transition this and make this as peaceful and as comfortable as possible? And that's not giving up hope, that's being realistic.
Well, and we would all hope that our conversation this morning would help people, including ourselves, to live more fully, knowing that we're going to die and that life on this earth is fragile and limited. And death is the only certainty. That's the only promise that we know is going to happen, other than taxes, maybe.
Can't get away from those either.
No. But you know, back in 1769, and this is a quote from the Philip Roth book, Every Man. Samuel Johnson, if you asked him in 1769, he was 60 years old, if one should fortify the mind against the approach of death, and he would have said, "No, sir, let it alone. It matters not how a man dies, but how he lives." And I think that's the important point today. The act of dying is not of importance. And Boswell said in 1799 that the act of dying is not important because it lasts so short a time compared to living. And that helps me put something in perspective. Our life expectancy has changed. The services we have through great medical staff, through churches, through synagogues, through whatever faith community has changed. There's availability of all sorts of support to surround the dying with dignity and control. But evidently, I didn't even say that right, death's the last reality check. And maybe it will give us the courage to live and to live more fully rather than cautiously. So I encourage anybody watching this morning to go out and live each day as if they were going to die, knowing that when it comes time to die, the resources are plentiful in this town through people like yourselves, but also that if they have lived a full life, they'll be able to die a good death. The great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said, "Take care with the end as you have with the beginning." And maybe those are the words we'll close with today. I thank you for watching this episode of Ethical Perspectives on the News, which has been brought to you by the Interreligious Council of Linn County. Thank you very much.